This is your tropical weather update for Wednesday, June 15th. The Atlantic is still quiet, but we'll still take a close look. And in the Eastern Pacific, it still won't be long before we get Tropical Storm Beatriz. This is the latest highlighted area from the National Hurricane Center. This was a bit more toward the west yesterday, but they've shifted it back to the east. As we alluded to, some of the more dominant low-level energy was still coming in from the east, and now I think this is going to be the primary area to watch for upcoming development. Still, nothing stands out in the Atlantic. We do have a few weak tropical waves traversing the basin. One is over the Central Caribbean now, another one just made it through the Lesser Antilles, and we have a much weaker tropical wave near 30 degrees west. Also, if you take a quick look at the Eastern Pacific, we now have a 1008 millibar surface low initialized, and it's drifting westward. This is part of the monsoon trough, and this will be the setting stage for tropical development. Latest satellite imagery confirms that the Gulf of Mexico, Western Atlantic, and deep Central and Eastern Atlantic are very quiet. In the Eastern and Central Atlantic, we now have a strong outburst of Saharan air that's going to stabilize the atmosphere out there for the coming week. In the Caribbean, all is very quiet. The tropical wave that we've been monitoring that's coming in from the east is now losing much of its convection, and that's due to the fact that it's moving into an area of very dry air. And not only that, but it's very strong wind shear out in this region across the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. And the only other notable area on satellite imagery is down in the southwest Caribbean where we've had a flare-up of convection. But all of this is more so associated with the eastern Pacific monsoon that's going to orient or shift itself more toward the west to the south of Mexico. So we're not expecting anything in the Atlantic basin over the coming 72 hours. If anything, this tropical wave that we've noted is going to move more toward the west and possibly end up over Central America or the southwest Gulf of Mexico. As of right now, there are no indications that this is going to develop in the near future, but as always, we'll keep a close watch on these tropical waves during the month of June, because if they ever do anything, it's going to be more so in the western Caribbean or Gulf of Mexico once they get there. This map, best of all, shows the reason why we're a bit concerned about East Pacific development over the coming 4 to 5 days. As you can see, this is the wind shear. This is the current location of our broad low pressure area, and wind shear values in this immediate location are not very strong. If anything, there is some slight easterly and northerly wind shear, as the main favorable upper level anticyclone is still located off toward the northwest. But model guidance shows that over time, this broad area of low pressure will move to the northwest or west-northwest, where initially it will continue to encounter some very weak easterly and northerly shear, but as it begins to move underneath this upper-level anticyclone, conditions will only become more favorable. The latest low-level steering also shows the reason why this monsoon lower trough may begin to move a bit more toward the northwest. As you can see, the subtropical ridge over much of the Atlantic is dominating the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, but the western periphery exists along where this low is currently located. Thus, a bit of a movement toward the north will more than likely occur. As the storm intensifies, a bit of a more westerly turn later in the period may begin. As we can see, the mid-level ridging is a bit more dominant than it is in the low levels, and of course the mid-levels is what steers your more intense tropical cyclones. So we may see a northwest motion followed up by a turn a bit toward the west. But will it directly move inland? Well, it's still somewhat hard to say at this current time, but we'll take a look at some model guidance. I should also note that the water temperatures just off the Mexican coast are more than favorable for rapid intensification. In fact, some of the highest oceanic heat content in the entire eastern Pacific is right along the Mexican Riviera. This is the latest moisture profile, and this will help us not only determine if there is enough available moisture for tropical activity, but it will also help us determine where the greatest concentration of low-level vorticity or low pressure is located. As we can see, there's more than enough available moisture along the west-to-east monsoon trough, but also more importantly, toward the end of this animation, you will notice that the greatest amount of low-level turning is beginning to set itself up near 10 degrees north and 90 degrees west. This is more than likely the location of where our dominant low pressure area is going to really come together over the next 24 to 36 hours before it begins to work its way toward the west-northwest. I'll let this play out one more time, and as you'll see at the very end, we have a little bit of turning in that area. Here's another look at the most recent satellite imagery, and right around here is the location of where we're seeing the most distinct low-level turning. It's really not all that strong at the moment, but give it some time. The biggest convective flare-up is a bit to the northwest of that location. If anything, like we said earlier, there is some easterly wind shear, and that could be the reason why this convection is off to the west a little bit. We'll still have to monitor that area to see if we have any relocation of low pressure, but I still think the main organization is going to begin to take place a bit back more toward the east as it works its way overall toward the west. And this is just a quick look at the enhanced infrared. Obviously, we still have a lot of disorganized activity, but within 2 to 3 days, this should really become more organized. On a more global scale, the enhancing phase, or an upward pulse of the Madden-Julian oscillation, is also continuing to move from west to east. Yesterday it was still over the central Pacific, and now it's continuing to move east, and now it's beginning to move over the basin of interest. And this is another positive factor for tropical development in the coming 72 to 96 hours. Now what we're about to look at is the 12Z afternoon run of the Canadian model, and before I set this into motion, there's a couple things I dislike with the model. First off, this is the Eastern Pacific, this is the Mexican Riviera, so this is the whole entire area that we're going to keep a close watch on. And as I set this into motion, the model does not strengthen any specific areas of low pressure until we get into the 4 to 5 day range. And that's, first of all, fairly unusual because that's not very far away from where the storm is currently located. So it's basically indicating little to no movement over almost a week-long span. And in addition to that, it takes the system almost due north. We can get a better grasp as to what is going on in the model when we look at the low levels. And as we see, the model is still developing or trying to develop two separate areas of low pressure right near each other, and that's not a realistic scenario. And as both of these features develop in the model, that's going to interfere with the forecast track of this system as well. And I'm really not buying into the northerly motion straight into Mexico the way this model is showing things. Now, perhaps a much more realistic scenario is coming from the 12Z GFS. This model shows development a lot quicker, which makes sense due to the fact that upper level conditions are so favorable. And instead of taking the storm due north, it takes it more toward the west as it continues to intensify. Now this is the GFS 500 millibar steering, and we'll see the development of our storm to the south, but I also want you to keep your eyes focused on central Mexico, where you will see a presence of mid-level ridging persisting throughout the period, as we see right about here, and that's going to help the storm continue to move westbound without turning north into Mexico. The GFS also continues to show upper-level ridging near the Mexican Riviera throughout the 7-day period, which is an indication that conditions will remain conducive as the storm moves westbound. The afternoon run of the ECMWF model is not completely finished at the time of this video, but I will take you through the 96-hour forecast. This is the current time, and as we can see, the model correctly diagnoses the area with broad low pressure. And as we evolve this into 24 hours, this is now Thursday morning. There's still not a whole lot out there based on the model, but by 48 hours we begin to see a strengthening of low pressure. This is Friday morning. Saturday morning we have more of a clear-cut run toward tropical depression status. And by Sunday we have a clear-cut tropical depression or tropical storm not that far away from the Mexican coast. And this looks like it's in fairly good agreement with the latest GFS run. It develops the storm at about the same time, and it also maintains strong mid-level ridging over much of Mexico and the south-central United States, which would imply that this storm should continue moving in a general west to west-northwest fashion throughout the end of this forecast model solution. So overall, the GFS and European agree that the storm will develop into a tropical storm, possibly a hurricane down the road, but more than likely, based on this 96-hour forecast pattern, the mid-level ridging should prevent the storm from turning north straight into Mexico. While I say that, I still do not want to give anyone a strong vote of confidence along the coast that you will not be directly impacted by this storm. It's still too far out, and when they haven't even developed yet, they're even more difficult to forecast than compared to if we already had a hurricane out there. So if you live along the Mexican Riviera, including Acapulco, go ahead and keep a close watch on this storm. It looks like it's going to get close enough to where at the very least you could see some tropical storm watches for your area. So bottom line is keep a close eye on the tropics. Continue to monitor products from the National Hurricane Center. That's going to be hurricanes.gov, and you can find all the latest official information there. And finally, before I leave you for the afternoon, I do want to mention some of the long-range model guidance. There's been a lot of talk on internet web forums about the possibility of Southwest Gulf development in the 10 to 15 day range, and this will be a thing that we'll start to keep an eye on, although I must say that the only model that really suggests development will be the operational GFS, and really any forecast beyond 7 to 8 days should be taken with a grain of salt. The models have a really hard time forecasting this far in advance, and I'm really not buying into this solution just yet. Just for example, if all of the main energy gets taken off by that tropical cyclone to the south of Mexico, that could leave the southwest Gulf with little to no energy to work with. So it's going to be an evolving situation. We'll just keep an eye on things, but obviously we have a very long time to watch for that possibility. So that's your tropical weather update for this Wednesday afternoon. I hope you have a good day and check in again tomorrow for another new video.